Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest edition of the Shukri Wrights podcast with your host, Shukri Wrights. I don't know any other way to begin this podcast except through transparency, honesty, and to give you, the audience, an insight as to what's been going on. For those of you who don't follow me on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram and have no idea what's been going on, my beloved uncle, Maurice Samuels, as I have affectionately called him Uncle Reece, passed away on Sunday, March 14th. It's been a very difficult 2 weeks for me personally and my family. And this is the first podcast recording that I am doing since he returned back to be with God. The day of this podcast release, which will be on Friday, March 26th, would have been his 66th birthday. And I'm going to try my best to get through this portion of the podcast without breaking down or emotional. And if I do, please understand that this is a very emotional topic for me, and as well as a very difficult um, time for me personally, emotionally, as I continue to grieve. See, my uncle Reese was he wasn't simply an uncle. He was an uncle because that was my mother's brother. But in actuality, he was more than an uncle. He was really more like a father figure in a sense of the type of relationship that Uncle Reese and I had. We talk about everything: sports, life, social justice. In fact, him and I had numerous conversations over the years pertaining to my place in society as a young black man who also happens to be Muslim in this country. We talked about family. We talked about love. We've talked about so many different things, different topics. But the thing that hurts me even as I do this recording right now is that I won't be able to hear his voice ever again. And the reason why I'm doing this is because, like, again, like I know there's a lot of people out there who may not even know what has been going on and what's been going on in my life. So I decided to lift up the curtain and to give you guys details and insight as to what's been going on. I haven't been on the radio in a couple of weeks. Um, I haven't been doing any podcasts at all. I just I just didn't have it in me in terms of being fully present and being open and transparent and being ready to continue to do what I love despite losing the one man who's been there for me at every stage and every juncture in my life. He may not have been there physically always, but his presence through phone conversations and just feeling his his love for me and as well as my love for him was more than enough to help me get through some of the toughest moments and days of my life. He was a man who truly loved his family, who truly loved and impacted so many people around the world, who truly have had the privilege to, whether if it was through reading his writings or through having the opportunity to talk to him through letters and so forth. He was a man who was very intuitive, incredibly wise, someone who was resilient, someone who survived stage 3 prostate cancer. I remember in March 2018, 3 years ago this month, I called my mom one afternoon as I'm on lunch break from work. And at that end of that conversation, she tells me the news that Uncle Reece was diagnosed with stage 3 prostate cancer. And I remember that afternoon I broke down emotionally. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what was going to happen. But that man, he pulled through. He survived. Last year, he came down with COVID at the beginning of the pandemic. Me being here in Boston, he being in New York, New York State specifically. I was terrified. I was stressed. I was worried. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know, like, how could I be of help? And the only way I knew how was to pray. So that's what I did. He survived. That man has been the symbol, or one of the big symbols in my life in terms of perseverance and strength, despite life's obstacles and challenges that has been thrown at him. Uncle Reese, I know that there won't be anything that I can ever say that will bring you back, as I miss you and I think about you every single day. And as I sit here, talk about you, and as well as your impact on me, on my life, it's truly imperative to me, and it's important to you that you know that I am going to keep my promise. And I made a promise to you. And my promise to you was that I was going to make you proud. I was going to take care of mom, your sister. I made a promise to myself that I am going to become the best version of me that I can be possible, whether if it was in terms of personal growth, career advancement, or even simply carrying on your legacy and cherishing the memories that you and I have together. The memories that you and I share that can never, ever be taken away. The moments that you and I have shared, too many to enumerate, impossible to capsulate. That's forever going to stay with me. The days, the evenings where we laughed, we cried on the phone, those memories are always going to stick with me for the rest of my life. I sit here today as I do this recording, and even this morning when I woke up, I did shed a few tears, not because of anger or bitterness. It is rather because how much I really miss your presence, how much you have meant to me in my life growing up as a man, And as well as realizing and accepting that while you are no longer here physically, but your spirit absolutely will still live on through me. And I mean every bit of that as it escapes my lips into the thin air that I breathe in. I can't help but to sit here today as I do this first podcast since you passed away, but to use this and use the platform that I've been given to honor you, to remember how much your wisdom and your advice has helped me and has helped me grow as a person and even as a broadcaster. My only wish was that you've had the opportunity to listen to my podcast and my radio show. But I also do know that you're no longer suffering, you're no longer hurting. That is the one solace that I do take into account. And I want you to know that even on my worst days, that your voice still permeates in my mind, that your impact on me still lives on within me, and how much I'm going to miss those walks where you would grab me and wrap your arm around my shoulder blade and pull me in as if I was your actual son. I'm going to miss a lot of a lot of the small things in the way that your touch and your understanding. I'm going to miss all of that terribly. And even now, as I sit here and I reflect on what has been a very difficult week and a half, nearly 2 weeks since you've passed, I do know that your impact and your influence on me will never die. It'll never wash away. And for that, I am eternally grateful for having someone truly as incredible of a man as you were in my life for 29 and a half years. It makes me sad to think that you will not be here on this earth to see me bring my first child into this world, or I should say, or my future wife bring my first child into this world, and you meet your great nephew or your great niece. It hurts that you will never be able to have a conversation with my future wife. There's so many moments that I wish that you will be here for, but that you won't. And for that, during those days, I am going to think about you heavily. I'm going to think about you heavily, and I'm going to remember the days and those moments that those days and those memories in which that you and I shared, and that more than anything else, that your impact on me has been truly genuine, truly sincere. And I'm sorry that I'm getting emotional right now. Um, But this moment, I want to dedicate to you, Uncle Reese, and that I know for a fact that you are no longer suffering and that you are at peace. I'm going to specifically dedicate this podcast episode to you, for you, as I begin to pick up the pieces of moving forward. And by moving forward, meaning carrying on those memories and as well as remembering the lessons that you've taught me. And with that, this podcast episode that I'm doing today, I'm going to dedicate it to you. I'm going to dedicate it to my family, and that I'm excited and it's an honor to bring in Chris Carlin of ESPN New York 98.7 FM to the podcast in just a moment. And joining me now here on the Shukri Wrights podcast is the one and only Chris Carlin of 98.7 ESPN, the host of Carlin weeknights from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. on 98.7 ESPN and the ESPN app. Carlin, what's going on, my man? How's it going?
It's going great. Thanks for having me, Shukri. How you doing?
I'm doing okay. It's been a rather emotional time, as I was explaining to you pre bringing you onto the podcast, and as well as for you. In fact, I want to give you the opportunity to talk about your friend in which I used to do games with at Rutgers, in which I heard a little bit about this past week, but I never really got the chance to understand the magnitude of such a loss. So I want to give you the opportunity to talk about it.
Sure. Joe Boylan, who was a fixture at Rutgers for a long time and spent a lot of time as the athletic director at Loyola down in Maryland, passed away. He was the color commentator on the Rutgers basketball broadcast for the last 6 years. Joe and I only worked together for 1 year. I had to give up basketball when I took a job in Philadelphia,
Mm.
but just became really good friends and just one of those guys that there are so few people in life that make you feel special when you talk to them, and he was one of those guys. And I was going back through my text messages this week from him, and
Wow.
every single one of them was kind of an encouraging one out of nowhere, no matter the situation. So we lost a giant in our community, a guy that was around Rutgers for a very long time in the 70s and 80s, into early 90s, and then went to Loyola to be the AD, and then came back a few years ago to do these games in retirement. And just fantastic guy. I only knew him for 6 years, but one of those guys that I wish that I knew a lot longer than that.
For sure, like amazing when you're able to look back on people whose impact has been truly profound in our lives. For me, it was my uncle Maurice, in which that with him I shared so many indelible moments with him. In fact, just to give you and as well as the audience a peek into behind the curtain, rather, when I moved here to Boston in February 2017, one of the things that I'll always remember was that night of February 14th, which was Valentine's Day. And I got home from my old job where I used to work in New York. And I remember I walked upstairs to my mom's room. She's got my Uncle Reese on the phone, on speakerphone. And at that point, I'm in an emotional state because here I am about to move out of the mother's nest
Mm.
out into the world. And my uncle is literally right there on the phone. I can hear his voice loud and clear. And it was just one of those things where it was like, okay, this is really real now. And he was just like, listen, this day was coming, and you are going off to make your mark in the world. Just grab on to life by the horns, and don't be afraid to fail. And it was just it was just that conversation and that moment that I shared with him that makes it all the more powerful yet bittersweet as well. So when you talked about going through those text messages, I haven't even gotten the chance to go back through old emails that him and I exchanged, just because I don't know if I'm ready to do that just yet.
Mhm. Yeah, I can understand that. We were, I got the call last week that Joe had suffered a stroke, and
Oh.
they asked me to fill in on the for color commentary for Rutgers making the tournament, which was a huge deal. It's the first time in 30 years that they had made the tournament, and you know, for Joe not to be able to do the game, he was looking forward to doing it.
Mm.
Was just was crushing. But at first it was sounding like he was going to be okay, and it just kind of took a turn over the weekend. He didn't get to see them win on Friday night, but he knew that they won, and he passed away just before the game on Saturday. So we were, or on Sunday rather. So we were definitely doing it with a heavy heart. But it is amazing when you really look at it, and it's unfortunate that we really don't fully appreciate the people that touch our lives the way they do, sometimes until they're gone. And you know, Joe's a guy that I'm exceptionally grateful for having had in my life.
For sure, and like I send my condolences to you and as well as everyone who
You
knew
as
him,
well.
and I appreciate that. In fact, I had the chance to listen to Boomer Geo a couple of days ago, and it was talked about, actually, I believe it was Monday,
Mhm.
during the program, in which that I didn't know or understand just how big of a loss this was. But now, in listening to you talk about it, and now it's starting to really hit me in terms of the impact he's had on the Rutgers community, and as well as on, like, for like the Rutgers basketball broadcast and so forth. So, like, the one thing I'll ask you to get things started is, March Madness is usually the time of year where everything gets a bit crazy.
Mhm.
We've seen some wild upsets already, and I just want to ask you, what is your overall perspective on some of the upsets that we've seen happen already during this March Madness tournament, where it just seems like Gonzaga is the only number one team that's still standing right now?
I look at it from a couple of different perspectives. Number one, I think we go through something every year where maybe the level of the mid-major basketball that's played doesn't necessarily get as much respect as it should. And
Mm.
I think a lot of times when you see these mid-major teams pull upsets, or even low major teams pull upsets, they're a group that has played together for a long time. They're usually senior laden, and uh, that, I think, really goes a long, long way. There is a lot to be said for talent, but there's a lot to be said for talent development.
For sure.
And on that level, that's what you have to do. You have to develop talent over the course of 2 to 3 to 4 years in your program. And I think that's a lot of what we have seen. I think, secondly, you know, I look at, just seeing some of these teams advance and seeing some others get knocked out. I wouldn't call it an overconfidence, but I would say that it's definitely difficult to really understand how good a team is until they're in front of you and you're
Mm.
getting their best punch. And there are teams that have been in this tournament that you can, if you watch them, high seeds that have taken some haymakers. Some of them have gotten knocked out, some of them haven't, and really have not understood what they're facing at the moment. So I think that's a little combination of that. And I think we'd all be naive not to think that COVID has played into this a little bit. So
For
many
sure.
teams have had
Mm.
start and stops and no rhythm to the season, and are probably a little bit more worn down than usual, because I don't know that any of us can truly appreciate what the sacrifice level is this year for college or for student athletes. They don't see family, they don't do anything social pretty much all season long. And that's really amazing to think about, that you're spending your college experience being kind of locked up in a lot of ways just to make college basketball happen. There's sacrifice involved in being great on any level, but this has been above and beyond, I think, for student athletes.
Oh, without question. And I think the term sacrifice has been the common theme over the course of the past year for all of us, in which that we've all have had to make sacrifices on some level, whether it be in terms of personal or career or etc. So how has COVID impacted you over the course of the past year?
I think for me, I've been very fortunate. My wife and I are, we don't have any kids. We have a dog, and it's just been kind of the two of us in the house. And I have watching what my siblings have gone through with, um, educating and all of the homeschooling stuff. I think we have certainly had it a lot easier on that front. For me, on a professional level, it's been very interesting because um, I basically had started at ESPN at the beginning of last year. And I'm so used to going into a studio and doing a show that I really kind of didn't know any other way. And then all of a sudden, I'm doing a show from here, from home. Um, and my thing has really been about trying to get better in any way that I can. What can I add that I haven't been doing? I've spent time this past year setting up a situation where I've been able to video stream my own show, and it's just adding another element to it to try to, um, you know, enhance value, all that kind of stuff. And I've basically done it by just going and learning software and editing equipment and all that kind of stuff. Like I knew how to edit audio, but I didn't know how to edit video, all those kinds of things, and learning about live streaming. So I've tried to take it as an educational experience more than anything. All right, how can I take this time and get better at what I do? Um, and I know that sounds a little cliche, but it is true. You get to a point of like, okay, I need to just expand what I'm doing and be better at it. And so that's been important for me. But at the same time, I think that it's had its mental effect on all of us. I
Oh,
mean, my wife and I were
100%.
talking this morning, right?
Mhm.
And I'm looking outside right now and I see a lot of gray. And it
Yeah.
feels like I've seen nothing but gray for a year plus now, even though we had some of the summer and all that. And I said, this whole idea of, I live in New Jersey, of living in a warm weather climate is really starting to look a lot more attractive. you know, like, I'm
I
not
hear
saying we're
you.
moving to Florida, but like if in the next couple of years it becomes clear with my job, it's not going to matter where I live, we need to look at this. So,
Oh
and she
man.
just was kind of like, all right, settle down a little bit, let's realize the true impact of it. But
Yeah.
look, I think it's had an impact on everybody's mental state, some more than others. I have tried to do some things to keep myself relatively sane throughout, but it
Mhm.
hasn't been an easy thing to do. And I think that's been the case for everybody. I feel like my level of sacrifice is a heck of a lot less than what most people are dealing with.
You talk about how we've had to find ways to continue to get better, and as well as like finding ways to keep yourself sane. I want to address both parts. I'm gonna start with the finding ways to get better. You talk about live streaming your shows, which I find to be really impressive, considering that your show is primarily radio based. And
Mhm.
I'm sure there are people that are working back at the studio, whether if it's whether if it's RJ or Santiago, like they're working by behind the glass and so forth, doing the program. When you first started looking into live streaming your show, What were some of the things that you learned early on that helped you make that transition a bit easier for people to be able to watch your show?
Well, the first thing was I have seen this kind of thing before, and
Mm,
I was not going to let it affect any of the quality of the radio show. It is a radio show first and foremost. And I think when you see radio shows that are on TV or
mm,
um, live streamed, like that's where they're at their most effective. When it just has that feel of people just talking, and it's not me specifically talking at the camera, Um, spare you my sneeze. I I so that was number one for me. So I waited a long time in really learning all of the. I knew a lot of the technical equipment already, but not all of it. So I really wanted to be in a position where I felt like I'm comfortable enough to do this, where it's not going to affect the quality of what I'm doing, because you do have to think about all the technical aspects of it too. What is the easiest way for me to do this?
mm.
So, yeah, did it cost a little investment? It did, to get a couple of pieces of equipment. But I didn't spend nearly as much as I thought I would trying to make this happen. So that was the biggest challenge: is I'm going to do this, but it cannot come at the expense of anything I am doing on the air. And that's easy to say, but not necessarily easy to do. Um, I think the other part for me was really more about um, just wanting to expand it into something else. Are there millions of viewers watching it every night? No, no, but it's trying to build. We all look around and we see how much media is changing, and we have to adapt. We have to adapt with the times. So, and I'm still way behind on all that stuff. I really, truly am. But um, you get better through change, and you get better through work. And that's where it was important to me. But the biggest thing was just making sure that I could do all of it without overthinking and losing focus on the quality of the product itself.
And I think that speaks volumes in which that talk about investing in like equipment and as something that I recently just did. In fact, I finally was able to purchase the cloud lifter for my radio mic. I used the Electro Voice RE20.
Mhm.
I didn't have that before. And I mean, I've been hearing about how much of a difference it makes in terms of bringing like power to the mic, and as well as like when you actually hear yourself speak, like how different it sounds. And I gave it a little test run yesterday, and I noticed a difference. I was like, "Ooh, this is
Yeah,
exactly how it's supposed to sound on radio."
right.
And that in itself is like, okay, that got me all giddy and excited, and it's like the small little things I once would like gloss over and just be like, yeah, okay, whatever. Now it's like, ooh, I'm excited. I like this.
Yeah.
And and which brings me back to part two. You talked about how you having to, find ways to keep yourself sane and not allow yourself to go crazy during these times. What were some of the things that you discovered and learned in this process to help you maintain a balance in terms of your mental health, and as well as ensuring that there is still some sort of normalcy in your daily life?
Well, let's be clear. I'm still looking.
Sure.
I'm really trying. The way my schedule is, I am not somebody that does great when he doesn't have anything to do. I need things to do.
I'm the
You
same
know.
way. I fully understand.
Yeah. So I'll give you an example. A few weeks ago, um, with the Knicks and Rangers being on our station,
Mhm.
my show gets preempted quite a bit. And so there was a week where I did not have one show because of games.
Wow.
Yeah. And there have been a couple of those. And listen, it is what it is. You
Mhm.
deal with it. But my wife looked at me on Sunday of that week and realized so you have nothing to do all week. And I said, nope, not a thing. And she's like, so you're going to be sitting around the house all week? And I said, yep. And she said, that's not going to work. And, so it was one of
Yeah.
those things. All right, go online, take a look at, you know, I, for instance, for me,
Yeah.
I enjoy going and playing golf. I enjoy trying to, just go and get into the sunshine again, like I was talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I looked online, like, okay, Vegas was exceptionally cheap, and I just went out there to be in the sun for a couple of days. Um,
Wow.
I mean, exceptionally cheap. Like $160 round trip on the plane. So, yeah,
Wow.
and the hotel rooms were nothing. So anyway, the point
Yeah.
being, like that, those are a couple of little things I did. I made a couple of little trips, but I also, when I have been doing my best during this, has been when I've been taking an hour and going outside for a walk. When I have been trying to, when I have things to do, I'm good, but I'm mentally not as good at focusing. So I'm sitting here trying to let me organize my day. Okay, I am not going to get distracted by text messages and all that stuff for this hour and a half. I am going to focus on everything I want to do. If I do have a show that night, to map out um, the show, all that kind of stuff. It is difficult. Um, Exercise. Have always struggled with my weight, and I'm 48, and that's not going to get easier. And I've seen friends recently go through health scares, and it really gives you an appreciation for health as the true currency that we all have, that is the most important. And so I have to find a way to do that. Mental health. I'm not ashamed to say it. I absolutely have a therapist. I talk. I need to do that. It's something that is important because I just mental illness has been in my family. It's a topic that is, or just an issue that is very close to me, and I have to do what I have to do to maintain that. Um, and I've had some dark times personally the last couple of years. I got fired at WFAN. That was a tough time. It was the first time I had been fired in my life, and it was from a place that I grew up at and absolutely loved. And it was dark for me for a bit, even though I was able to get a job pretty quickly. Um, yeah, it was not easy. So, and everybody goes through that stuff at some point or another, but you don't appreciate it until you go through it and see what it's like. So, all of that, it's not easy. I think my biggest thing is just talking to someone helps me immensely on that front. It really does, because I don't want to be the guy that brings that home. I don't want to be the guy that has to talk to my wife about it. She's dealt with it too. She talks to somebody too, because I don't think that's healthy to um, talk about everything on that front with your spouse. You have to be able to have outlets for talking. So anyway, long story short, yeah, it's not easy. It's a challenge, but it's not anything that that any of us aren't going through.
And I'm really glad that you brought this to the forefront because, and I want to be abundantly clear to you, and especially for those that are going to be listening, is that we need, and especially as men, we need to be a lot more vocal about our mental health. In fact, I'll be the first to tell you, and I've been very candid and honest with both the podcast and the radio audience locally, that I started dealing with anxiety last June, right in the aftermath of the George Floyd murder that shook this entire nation. And in fact, before that, I never dealt with mental health issues or like depression or anything like that. But what those anxiety attacks have changed me in a way that it changed me in a way that has made me realize that, hey, it's okay to talk about these things, that we need to talk about it and not feel as if that, well, we're supposed to be the macho man, and to feel that we have to keep everything bottled in. So the question that I will ask you, and I want you to be as open and as honest with me as possible, what is your message to any person listening, whether they're male or female or whatever, in terms of being honest with themselves and seeking therapy in terms of addressing their mental health?
Well, let's talk about this on a couple of fronts, okay?
Sure, absolutely.
Um, Number one, my wife has dealt with um, mental illness in her life throughout, because it's a chemical thing, and it's not a thing that you can fully control. And when we were first together and I was starting to learn about it, what is the instant male instinct? It is to fix it.
Yep.
I want to fix it for you. I want to do that. And it took me so long to learn that's not something that you can just do. Like,
Mm.
I think it was now this is on a severe level, mind you.
Yeah.
But I think I started to appreciate it a little bit more when I read about it. And I read about Dick Cavett. And Dick Cavett has dealt with depression his entire life. And the way he described it was, um, if you had a pill sitting in front of you on a table and it could cure all of your mental illness problems, and you are sitting there in this state of depression, that you are so debilitated that you wouldn't reach up and take the pill. It would just sit there. That was one. And number two was when my doctor described to me, imagine trying to run a marathon on a broken leg.
Mm.
When you start imagining it in terms that we understand a little bit more, okay. And so it took me a while to appreciate that and to understand what I deal with. I have always believed this, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but
Yeah.
we are all broken in one way or another.
Yep.
We are all broken. We all have our issues, and social media and everything, you don't see that. You just don't,
Mm-hmm.
and it's never, I say that I'm as guilty as anybody. Um, because from a business standpoint, it's good for me to be on social media, but I look at it sometimes like your life cannot be this perfect all the time. It
Exactly.
can't be. So, long story short here, my message is it's beyond okay. I grew up in an Irish Catholic family where we didn't talk about things. And my father had
Mm.
massively high blood pressure and died from a stroke at 60. And
Wow.
that's part of it. That's part of a reason why, is because he was so stressed out and so tough, but kept it in, that it does real, true physical damage to you.
Wow.
So I just know that when you can go and have a conversation with a professional, and it's not information that's ever leaving the room, you build that trust.
Mhm.
It's amazing how much better you can feel. I've gone into appointments thinking I have nothing to say today. And I come out of it thinking, wow, I feel a lot better. And it's just, it gives you good perspective. It gives you the chance to get somebody else's perspective on what you're saying and what you're going through. And am I wrong about this?
Yeah.
So I just, I encourage anybody who feels like they are um, trapped at times mentally to do that, to talk to somebody, to find the courage to do it. And I do mean find the courage, because it's not an easy thing to do. And one last one on this.
Sure. Sure.
Um, there's a book called 10% Happier.
Mm.
And I'm trying to remember the name of the author, but he's an ABC News correspondent.
Mm.
But he, in the middle of this, said something that has always stuck with me. That little voice in your head, it turns out is an asshole. And
Oh my God. I
it's
actually
so
understand.
true.
I understand it because, like, I have that voice in my head at times where it's like, you need to get your ass up and get yourself going. Like, yo, tough it up. Let's go. Like, no, it just resonated. Like, oh my God, like, that's me. Like, I know what you're talking about. We talk about the little voice in your head at times where it's like, yo, stop being soft, man. Get up, man. Stop being a
Yeah,
tough
it's
dude.
like your problems are not that this or
Mm-hmm.
that, or you're or you're not good enough, or all those things.
Yeah.
That dude's an asshole. That woman's an asshole. And you need to stop. When you realize that, it has helped me in terms of um thinking of it in different terms. So that's always been a big thing for me. When I
Yeah.
somebody gets in my head about, you may not be good enough to do this. No, you're an asshole. Okay, that's right. I forgot.
That moment of just brutal honesty is something I can't help but laugh at because
Hmm.
I think about that voice in my head in which is like, okay, why do you want to do this now? And sometimes you just don't have control where and when it's going to say, you remember me? I'm that voice in your head. Like, I don't care how you feel today, but I want to try to find a way to screw up your mood. Like, it's funny talking about it, but for everyone that can relate and understand, it's like, okay, I know exactly what you're talking about, and man, it really be delivering some serious gut punches. And I think this pandemic, what has changed so many people, including myself, and I'm sure that you also can relate to it as well, is that it has brought to the forefront the importance of having people that you can talk to in terms of what's going through your head or what are you thinking about. And like, I'll be the first to tell you, um and share with you that there was a point in time where I was alone. Like,
Yeah,
I was alone in the sense of I didn't know who I could talk to about what I was dealing with in terms of the anxiety and so forth. And don't get me wrong, like, my parents are alive and well. I have a phenomenal relationship with both my mom and my dad. But even then, there's only but so much you can go to them and talk to them about. And when you surround yourself with people who either are going through the same things that you're going through or have gone through the same thing that you've gone through, it makes a world of a difference.
I feel that very much. In my career, in my 20s, in my yeah, primarily my late 20s,
Mhm.
um, early to late 20s. There's a lot of sacrifice involved to try to get somewhere in my career. And the biggest sacrifice was a social life. And I spent a lot of time alone. And what that did, spending that much time in your own head, is not good for you, because how it affected me was, I'd look at other friends and I'd look at people that whether it was like women I was trying to, if I was going to date or not, or just friends. And, you'd see friends went out to a bar and had hung out and that kind of thing, and they didn't invite you. Like, everything becomes about you and how you're offended and how you're pissed off and how you're like, the world is just really revolving around you.
Mhm.
And you forget that, like, there are other pieces to it, and that other people actually have lives. And it's crazy to say that, but it's just true. It's just true, because the only person you have to talk to is that asshole. Like,
Mhm.
how can this person blow me off after everything I've done for them and all that? No, no, they have things to do too. And yeah, there are times you can get legit offended, but like, there were too many times I was getting overly offended by things that just weren't there. You invent things that just are not there. That's how it affected me. And being alone sucks. Being alone sucks. There's no getting around it. I'm somebody that um, enjoys it at times, but that period of my life was very, very difficult because I wanted to have more fun and more interaction with people and dating more. And what did I do? My way of dealing with it was eating, So
Mm.
that's just one of those things, and I'm still physically paying for that now, but trying to make up for it.
It's interesting. You said something during that response that struck a chord. In fact, during my college years in New York, because I'm from New York, born and raised, went to Long Island University on Brooklyn campus, and I remember so vividly the first 3 years of my college years. This was between '09 and 2012. I remember there would be days and there would be times where it'll be Friday night. And Friday nights in college, like what do college kids want to do? They want to go party, go to the dorm or go to this place and so forth. But that wasn't me. That wasn't
Yeah.
me at all. I was more of like, oh, let's go to the movies. Let's go to this restaurant. Let's go. I mean, for God's sakes, we're in New York City. Like there's plenty of options we can go to. We can go to Palmas Frites and somewhere in the Lower East Side and grab a bite there. Like, but that wasn't their focus. So what ended up happening was that, and I remember this from my freshman year in particular. There were so many times that you talk about how being alone sucked. I spent a lot of those Friday nights and Saturday nights alone. And what I would end up doing is I would go to the movies. I would hop on the PATH train either from the World Trade Center or from 33rd Street and take it over to Newport, go to the movies, watch one or two movies depending on what the schedule was, and then go back to where I was staying. But little did I know at that time there was a positive and there was a negative. Positive, I just learned to enjoy my own company.
Yeah.
But here's a negative, and you touched on it so eloquently. When you spend so much time alone, you don't realize how much in your own head you begin to get into. And I didn't realize this until years later. So when you
Yeah.
said that, it was like oh crap, you're right. Because now it's like a fight where I have to get out of my own head, and it's tough.
It is. It is tough. And part of that is to, like, if I spend too much time in the house, it's just going to be there. It's going to be that kind of thing. If I'm not doing things that are positive for what I am trying to make happen, you
Mm-hmm.
know, uh, it's it does damage to me. It really does. And I think more than anything, my best. Uh, it's just funny. I think about over the last year, and I'm the guy that I will make plans to go and do something, and then they'll get canceled, and I'll be like, oh, thank God. And
Oh my god.
yeah, it's so true. Like for
Yeah.
me, because like I want to go out and spend time with people and visit with them and have fun,
Mm-hmm.
and I see them living their lives, but at the same time, I don't. I just want to chill. Um, but anyway, I mean, there's so many complexities to all of it that I just think the mental health aspect of it has been uh, so overlooked for so many years. And
Absolutely.
if there's one thing, Shukri, that could come out of this, is that I hope that there is a better appreciation, that this is not, you know, for men about being tough. This is
Mm-hmm.
not about that. This is about stuff that everybody goes through. Um, there are times where it is important to be mentally tough, but when you're fighting through depression, asking for help is a good thing. is a good thing. And I would argue that that is part of mental toughness, having the ability to be tough enough to say, yeah, I need help on this one because I can't get this one done alone. And I need somebody else's perspective on what's going on up here. So, yeah.
I think that is so powerful because for so long, and we talked about this at nauseum, where we as men we're like, well, we just gonna have to power through and just keep on going because that's who we are as men. Whereas this pandemic has truly brought everyone to its knees. And if you point someone that turns around and says that, well, this pandemic hasn't affected me at all, like whatsoever, at any type of level, I'll show you a liar. Because
Yeah.
if there's one thing that I've realized is that this pandemic has had a way of humbling so many people, regardless of what you do for a living. Whether if you're in the radio business like you are, and as I'm building my radio career as well, or if you're someone that is like an average Joe working like the blue collar job, and so it doesn't matter. Every single person has been affected somehow, some way, and I think there is something to be said in which that, particularly for men, where I think there has been the stigma of not talking about what's going on with your dome. And I look at people in sports such as Robin Leonard, who is the goaltender for the Las Vegas Golden Knights, with such reverence, where it's like this is a guy playing one of the toughest positions in sports,
Yeah.
in the highest level there is in the NHL. And he's been very vocal, very open about his battle with depression. And I say, I wish more men had the strength that he has in being open and seeking help.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that there is truth to the notion of, hey, we got to keep moving forward. We got to keep doing that. But the way to do that is not by ignoring problems, it's by addressing them to keep moving forward. And really, like I talked about earlier, the instinct is to try to fix them.
Mhm.
Well, that has to be our own instinct too, to try to work on them to get better. That's moving forward. You know, just ignoring it and assuming it's going to go away, that's not moving forward. That's getting stuck in the sand.
Mm. Absolutely. And to, I want to lighten things up a bit, in which that there's a lot going on in the sports world,
Mm-hmm.
and especially in New York, where in New York right now there's a very interesting, as I like to say, a dynamic in terms of basketball in New York City. Because as you know, and I know, basketball at its core is the heartbeat of New York. There's
Yep.
no disrespect to the Yankees or the Mets, and I'm a diehard Yankee fan. But you look at the Brooklyn Nets, they've had this expectation ever since they've gotten James Harden, NBA Finals or bust. And you look at the New York Knicks, who have been abysmal for so long, for over the course of 20 years, with the exception of 2012, 2013, where they won 54 games. But now here is this team coached by Tom Thibodeau, and you got a young core like an RJ Barrett or Obi Toppin, and as well as Julius Randle, who was an all-star this year. What do you make of the shift in terms of the NBA and the basketball culture in New York, in terms of the two franchises who are separated by a mere subway line from Madison Square Garden to Barclays?
Well, it's interesting from my perspective as a talk show host.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be honest. The Nets make they get Durant, they get Kyrie, and you think they're going to take off and all that, and then they get James Harden, and uh, frankly, I'd bring up the Nets on the show and try to make points about the team. No reaction. Nobody cares. And
Mm.
the point about it is this: there is a lot more of people. Number one, there are so many more Knick fans than Net fans. It's not even funny.
That's true.
I mean,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Listen, when the Knicks are good, we know what this town is like.
Yes.
Okay, I compare it very much to, like, if you look at the Yankees and the Mets, that's kind of 2/3, 1/3. There are 2/3 Yankee fans, 1/3 Met fans, but that base is strong. I feel the Giants and the Jets are similar, but when you look at the Knicks and the Nets, that's 80 20
Mm-hmm.
at best. That's more like 85-15.
That's right.
And you have the Nets are so much more a bigger story outside of New York than they are here as a team collectively. But when you talk about the individual players, then it starts to really drum up a lot of interest. For instance, on my show last night, we were talking about Harden and the MVP, as that has started to come up quite a bit. And when I said, you know what, and I'm not the guy, for the record, who just says whatever he has to say to get reaction. That's not it. To me, Harden's not the MVP. And the reason is a couple of fold. Number one, Kyrie has played the majority of the time that he's been here.
Mm-hmm.
And I look at where the Nets are in the standings in the top three. Would they not be in the top three in the Eastern Conference if they hadn't made that trade? No, they would be. They would be, because the fourth team in the Eastern Conference is the Hawks.
Mm-hmm.
They're 7 games back of the Bucks, who are the third team, and the Nets, in terms of the loss column. So I look at it from that standpoint. But when it comes to the Nets, people are a lot more interested in talking about the individual superstars than they are the team as a whole. When you go nationally, people are more fascinated by the Nets because of how they're structured. We all know that there is infinitely more interest in the Knicks as a franchise right now,
Mm-hmm.
just because it feels like you've been in the desert for 20 years
Yeah.
drinking the sand, and now all of a
Yeah.
sudden you've got something to work with. You've got a team that buys in, that plays defense, that, you've got the true development of a player at 26 and Julius Randle, who just made this commitment to be much better. And you've seen development like I can't love enough watching the development of RJ Barrett.
Oh, yeah.
I love it. I absolutely love it. So those things, to me, for the Knicks to be 22 and 22 this year, that's amazing. So I think we will see it blow back up in a couple of years. But Shukri, I honestly look at it and I think about the Nets when they were going to the finals in New Jersey.
Yep.
And
02
they're
and
playing,
03.
think about this for a second. They're playing the Shaq and Kobe Lakers
Oh, yeah.
and the Tim Duncan led Spurs.
Mm-hmm.
And there were finals games they didn't sell out. How is that possible?
It's just stunning.
Yeah. And I know they're in Brooklyn, and I think there is a bigger fan base now that they're in Brooklyn, but I still don't think it's anywhere close to the Knicks. And I don't think it ever will be, frankly.
And you talked about those two years that they made the NBA Finals back to back in 2002, 2003. I think there's something very important I should also add to that discussion as well. Because let's travel back into that time. The New Jersey Devils were the behemoth of the NHL team in terms of the three local NHL teams in the region. Between the Rangers they were absolutely just mediocre. The Islanders were just so far out of the thought and the conscious of New York that they were like, oh, they're just there. Okay. The Devils, they were that team. You had Martin Brodeur, who was at the peak of his powers, and you had the Hall of Famers like Scott Stevens, Scott Niedermayer, and you had a New Jersey Devil great and Ken Danico as well, patrolling the blue line, and as well as you have other pieces that were playing the forwards.
Tremendous player. Yep.
Exactly, and Travis Zajac as well. Now, the Nets, you talked about playing the Lakers in 02. They got swept. Kobe and Shaq, and I still maintain the belief that if they did not get into the feud that they got into in 04, they would have won more than just the 3 titles that they won together during that three.
Oh, agreed. Yeah.
And you look at 03, and I think that is the greatest collective dynasty that we've seen in terms of the NBA between one head coach and one constant superstar that was there throughout in terms of Greg Popovich and Tim Duncan. You also had other places that were there, obviously, with David Robertson as well. You had the Manu Ginobilis and the Tony Parkers of the world and so forth. But there's something to be said about the passion of the Knicks and the passion of the Nets. Not to say that the Nets aren't they don't have passion and fan base, but it's like for you not to sell out at Continental Airlines Arena for the younger audience who don't remember that's where they played before moving to Newark. What does that say in terms of the general interest in the New Jersey Nets? Do you think that played a big part as to why they ultimately decided to make that move to Brooklyn?
Yeah, I think they did. I think that was a big part of it, and they thought going to Brooklyn was going to completely change the dynamic. Listen, when they're able to do it, they will sell out games because of the show that they will become. But I don't think that they're ever going to approach the Knicks. I just don't. I think that's a dynamic. We're trying to climb up that ladder, man. There is nothing like this town when the Knicks are good. There's
Absolutely.
nothing like it. It's off the charts. And you have, I mean, I was thinking about this the other day. Is LeBron the only player that could really, truly make the Nets close to a number one team in this town when he was in his prime? I don't even know if he could.
I don't think so.
Yeah, that speaks volumes about where they are.
Absolutely.
So to me, I just don't think you've got three of the greatest players on the planet on this team right now. And, outside of the individual talk, people just don't care.
And I think that speaks like a lot in terms of the way that it's perceived in New York and the way that it's that is I guess permeating into the collective conscious of New Yorkers. Now, in terms of the Yankees and Mets, this is an interesting year in particular for both the Yankees and Mets because I want to start with the Mets first because that trade for Francisco Lindor changed everything in terms of the perception of the franchise, in terms of how this team was going to be put together moving forward. That trade reminded me, and I'm a guy I was born in '91, so I'm old enough to remember when Piazza came to the Mets in May of '98, and that was like that year was the first time that I started paying attention to sports. Like as a young kid growing up in New York, I grew up a diehard Yankee fan, but I was also very attentive to what was going on over in Flushing. So when this trade happened in terms of Francisco Lindor, it was like, okay, this Mets team has a chance to really steal headlines in New York, considering that the Mets they still have a pretty good rotation with Jacob DeGrom, who is the best pitcher in baseball right now, and yet you have the Yankees who for 4 years have yet to have been able to overcome that hump in the postseason. For whatever reason that is, it could be a myriad of different factors. So the question I'll ask you is you look at the Yankees and Mets as we approach opening day in about a week's time. Which team do you think has the best chance of making a run to the World Series in 2021?
I still think it's the Yankees. And um, my primary issue there is that beyond Garrett Cole, I trust nothing. I trust nothing. I think Corey Kluber was not a great signing as a number two because
Yeah.
he's nowhere near the Corey Kluber he was a few years ago.
Yeah.
Jamison Tyon, we'll see, but again, Kluber's pitched 35 innings in 2 years, and uh, Tyon not much more than that because of his Tommy John. So
Yeah.
we'll see. I'm not optimistic on that front. I thought the Justin Wilson injury the last week did not help. The Yankees right now,
Mhm.
outside of um, Chapman, don't have a lefty. Uh, but I still think that it's hard to argue that they're not going to win 90 some games. Um, I believe the Mets have a really good chance, and Lindor could be the franchise altering Piazza type move. But uh, I still want to see. I don't think it's unreasonable to want to see Lindor play in New York just to see what that's like and play in front of hopefully soon a full house. I don't know
Yeah.
how soon that's going to be, but just to see what the pressure's like with him. But I think he'll be fine. I think he'll be fine. And I think he's a guy that you're going to want to have for a long time. I think the Mets and the Yankees are both going to have really good seasons. I'm getting tired of hearing about the Yankees from the standpoint of um, you used to hear all the time about championship or bust,
Yeah.
and okay, when does that actually come in? When do we actually look at that? And now it seems to be they look at it a lot more like we have to um, get to the postseason, and then we'll see what happens. I don't love that mentality.
And I think that mentality is part of the reason why they haven't been able to get over all that hump. And I strongly feel that it's been 4 years. They've just started in 2017. We all know what happened between the Yankees and the Astros and what we later found out about the Astros in 2017. But you had 18, 19, and as well as last season, even though it was the COVID shortened season. And I say, okay, it's easy to look at the overall scope of the team, but when I look at the core, and when I say the core, I mean guys like Judge, Sanchez, and even now Gleyber Torres, and to no faults of his own, and even Aaron Hicks. But I look at this core and I say, it's been 4 years now, and I think this year is a really important year for the Yankees as for what they're going to do beyond this season, because Aaron Judge's on contract is going to become a major talking point. So the question I'll ask you: do you think this season could potentially be a make it or break it year for this core of young guys on the Yankees who is going to be due for new contracts for the long term?
I don't think there's any doubt. And unfortunately, I have to go in a minute, but I
Sure.
I would say this when it comes to Judge in particular: if Judge can't stay healthy, Yankees can't pay him. They just can't. And I understand what he means to the fans and all that stuff. But let's be real. If you're going to be on the field for 110 games at best, how can I pay you $35 million a year? How can I justify that? I,
It's not
I
possible.
can't. Yeah. And I think that Aaron Judge at this point in his career, and I know for a fact that last year he was getting a little bit annoyed with the notion of being injury prone, because if you think back about how his calf injury was handled,
Hmm.
uh, first of all, he never spoke about it until a week or two later. He left Aaron Boone out there and his teammates out there to talk about it, which I didn't think was right,
Hmm.
because he knows that he's getting that knock, and he knows he's approaching free agency and that big payday. Well, they're doing everything they can to try to keep you healthy. I think with that kind of body type, it's very difficult to do, as we've seen with Stanton. Um, Torres, to me, he's got to be the guy, and um, you can't be out of shape last year
Hmm.
going into after the pandemic layoff. You can't be. It's inexcusable. So this
Absolutely.
is a big year for me for Torres to show that the 38 homers a couple of years ago was no fluke, and he's committed to being a great, great player.
Absolutely. Chris Carlin, host of Carlin on 98.7 ESPN, weeknights from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast today, and I want to say thank you so much for sharing me a very candid conversation that I hope that a lot of people will benefit from.
I appreciate it, Shukri, for having me, and I love having the honest conversation because I think it's all very important. Thank you again.
Absolutely, my pleasure.